This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on role of United Nations in maintaining peace and harmony. The participants are Salman Haider, former Foreign Secretary, and Mahindra Ved, senior journalist.
When a dispute takes a violent turn and threatens peace, you need a mediator, and that role is, in the global sense, is performed by the United Nations. That at least is its mandate. The track record in the last 68 years has of course been mixed, but there is no denying that United Nations is the only hope, the last hope. The world continues to witness conflicts, most of them without the mandate from the United Nations Security Council. Even those with the mandate have not been resolved, and in any case have not been very happy experiences. Mr. Haider, the world has just moved away from a conflict in Syria. What are the prospects of peace in West Asia as a result?
Well, I'm not sure that the world has moved away from... Yes, there was an immediate crisis not so long ago when it seemed as if there might be an external attack on Syria. But the internal strife within Syria remains extremely dangerous and very threatening, and it can spread from Syria itself to the neighborhood, and the neighborhood is an extensive neighborhood. We in India have some reason to be apprehensive as to what this conflict could signify for our own interests and our own welfare. So I think that our hope, along with that of so many others in the United Nations, must be, as indeed it is, that the UN will be able to play a positive role and do something to dampen these internal flames that have become so dangerous in Syria.
Well, as you said, United Nations definitely has a role. Now, Syrian war did not happen mainly because there was lack of unanimity in the United Nations Security Council. The permanent members, with Russia and China thwarting any moves by the United States and the West. Now, is this kind of lack of unanimity a good augury, or is it a good escape from the bad situation?
Lack of unanimity in taking action against Syria is, of course, in the circumstances that we have just seen, it's a good thing. That meant that there was no consensus at the highest international level, that of the UN Security Council, on intervention in Syria. And that meant that the risk that seemed almost unavoidable at one stage of an attack by outsiders on Syria with unknown consequences, that was averted. But that same lack of unanimity has also meant that there is no agreement on how to proceed for longer-lasting peace. There did seem to be some signs, and maybe these are not entirely fanciful, to think that the last crisis, which was so intense, had created some common ground between countries that were at loggerheads, primarily America and Russia. They were opposed to each other at the UN. Now, I don't know whether there is any prospect of their being able to work in sufficient agreement with each other to make a difference on the ground in Syria. One must hope that they can get their act together and help peace process there.
Well, the averting of the Syrian war has upset Israel, and I'm connecting that in a way with another war that seemed imminent a few years ago with Iran, and now United States and Iran are making up. That's why, how do you see the prospects of peace in West Asia?
Well, I think the prospects of peace at the moment are better than they were a few months ago, because even though what you've said is entirely correct, and that Israel is upset, makes no secret of the fact that it does not like what it sees as a kind of leniency shown to the disturbers of the peace in the region, there doesn't seem to be, at the present moment, any concerted effort by the countries, regional and non-regional, to try and sort things out through force. And that means that there is a breathing space to try and let diplomacy do its work.
Yes. The US, Iran, the possibility of thaws of upset Saudi Arabia, again, is a new factor in the whole thing.
It is a new factor, certainly. The thaw between America and Iran in itself, I think, is a very good thing. And for India, I think it is certainly desirable, because this is really on our doorstep. If some kind of military trouble erupts in between these two countries and other regional countries, then we are not very far from the scene, and our interests will be affected. So I'd say that even though the political aspects have not been sorted out and there's no clear way forward, the fact that war has been averted and that at the present moment there seems to be some slight prospect of a meeting of minds, at least to a limited extent, between America and Iran, I think that these should be regarded as useful steps.
See, the threat to the world peace from conventional war was always there, and then the chemical warfare came in. The more recent reasons for threat to peace are nuclear weapons and terrorism. And what is the role the United Nations can play?
The UN has tried to play a role. I think that so far as the nuclear issue is concerned, the UN has been very active with instruments of restraint and control, like the NPT. We are not party to it, but still we have to acknowledge that it is a principal instrument globally for trying to restrain proliferation, and we of course are not proliferators ourselves, so the broad sympathy is with maintenance of controls and harmony and peace in the nuclear area. And then there's the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the instrumentalities that the UN has taken the initiative in promoting and in trying to establish international agreement for is very much to the credit of the UN. We may not always be in agreement with them, but that doesn't mean that we do not support the broad purpose of what the UN is trying to do. In fact, globally there is a consensus that there should be restraint, that there should be instruments to prevent the nuclear issue becoming lethal, because if anything happens on that front, it will be a lethal issue.
What about terrorism? Because you had the 9/11 and the world has changed ever since, and nothing seems to have been resolved in this last 12, 13 years.
I think you're right. I think that on terrorism, nothing has been resolved, and in fact the UN has not been that clear in its methodologies.
Because what is terrorism to me is freedom movement to somebody else.
That's right, and they've not really been able to work their way out of that particular conundrum. But the more tricky, to my mind, is that some of the terrorist groups do get support from outside, and this is through pretense, through covert support, and even some of those countries which are supposedly in the forefront of the fight against terrorism are in fact quite capable of giving their quiet support behind the scenes to some terrorist or shall we say disturbing elements which seem to be operating in a manner that is useful for their own limited narrow interests.
See, India was one of the early ones to go to United Nations and makes the Kashmir dispute one of the real old issues with the United Nations, and it finds India perennially at conflict with Pakistan. Now, 65 years plus down the line, how do you see this role on the Kashmir issue, and what is the role United Nations can play?
I think the role of the United Nations is, so far as India-Pak issues are concerned, Kashmir including, of course, very much part of it, I think that role is more or less overtaken.
Shimla being one of them.
Shimla being the most important instrument where bilateralism is seen as the way forward. And in fact, bilateralism has served a very useful purpose over time. Since Shimla, that we have averted major conflict. There have been very, very serious episodes, but not the kind of general war that we saw earlier. And now the diplomatic efforts have been strengthened, especially with our assistance, and the kind of back-channel talks that took place a few years ago between India and Pakistan, in fact, have pointed the way to where we
really got to some kind of resolution, some kind of period of peace.
That's right.
But that got shattered.
Yes, but that can be revived, to my mind. Because I think the issues that were raised at that time and that were cleared and that were agreed between the two sides are those that we will have to return to, because in the interest of peace and progress.
Mr. Haider, can peace be achieved without the United Nations role, as it happens in some cases? I mean, India's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh is just back from China, and a lot of things were discussed at the bilateral level. So how far bilateralism can help? United Nations role remains where it is, but UN can help that bilateral role.
I think that is true. See, the UN under the Charter, has a lot of authority. It can actually impose conditions and impose outcomes and try and compel countries to do what the Security Council feels should be done. But that is an extreme position. To think of sending in armies in blue berets, the UN peacekeeping
forces. I was
forces.
coming to the peacekeeping role.
Yes. Well, I think that is something which today seems, I think there's a legitimate role, but it is not something that can be taking over a world government with coercion as its instrument.
Peacekeeper is not a policeman.
He's not a policeman. And what is necessary is that if there is a propensity, if there's a readiness on the parties on the ground, and they have to be brought to that point through a combination of factors, both coercion, not coercion is too strong, persuasion, as well as various other sort of instruments, somewhat coercive they could be at times. If that position is actually attained, then the UN is very useful in trying to maintain it, to ensure that commitments made are honored and don't break down too readily.
But somewhere down the line, don't you think there is lack of faith in United Nations? I mean, issues are related and sought to be sorted out through aggression. So, the way it happened in Iraq, the way it happened in so many number of conflicts in the last 60 years.
I think that's definitely correct. I think that one of the major difficulties that we have seen, you mentioned Iraq, is that major powers feel that they can disregard the United Nations. And when it comes to promoting what they think is their own interest and what they think must be done, the UN may well not sanction. The UN is a complex body and it can give sort of semi-sanctions of sort that provide some kind of cover for actions like Iraq. But on the whole, it is too often it can be pushed in a certain direction by powerful countries.
Part of the failure is because of the fact that this Security Council is an elite club called the permanent members. Would you think that more the merrier would help a greater equity amongst the members, more people which will join United Nations with a permanent membership? Would that help resolve the issues and strengthen the role for the United Nations?
I think that's unavoidable now. I think the time has come because after all, the composition of the United Nations, of the Security Council, reflects the world balance of power and authority and capacity at the end of the Second World War. It's a long, long time ago. Other countries have come up, they've become very powerful, including ours, and our role in peacekeeping is something which is obviously something that is important for us, and I think we should be able to contribute to global issues and global peacekeeping issues to the extent and in a manner that is appropriate for us, for a country of our size and importance.
So you would say there is hope for the United Nations and for the world?
Certainly, I don't think we can ever give up on the United Nations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on role of United Nations in maintaining peace and harmony. The participants were Salman Haider, former Foreign Secretary, and Mahindra Ved, senior journalist. It came to you in the program News Analysis, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.